emperor said one day at St. Helena. Nature seems to have calculated that I should have to endure great reverses. She has given me a mind of marble. Thunder cannot ruffle it. The shaft merely glides along. At another time, when some vexation arose at St. Helena, an individual who was near Napoleon at the time exclaimed, "Ah, sire, this must indeed increase your hatred of the English." Upon which the emperor, shrugging up his shoulders, said in a mingled tone of pleasantry and contempt, "Precious man, say rather that at most it may increase my hatred of this or that particular Englishman. But since we are on this subject, let me tell you that a man, he who has the true feelings of a man, never cherishes hatred. His anger or ill humor never goes beyond the irritation of the moment, the electrical stroke. He who is formed to discharge high duties and to exercise authority never considers persons. His views are directed to things, their weight and consequence. On a certain occasion, he remarked that he doubted not but his character would gain in proportion as it has advanced in posterity, and that future historians would conceive themselves too bound to avenge the injustice of contemporaries. Excess is always succeeded by reaction. Besides, he was of opinion that when viewed from a distance, his character would appear in a more favorable light by being relieved from many useless encumbrances. He would hereafter be judged by general views and not by petty details. Everything would be in harmony and all local irregularities would disappear. Above all, he would not be compared with himself, but with what might exist in a future period. He added that now as hereafter he could proudly submit every act of his private life to the most rigid scrutiny, confident that the severest judge would pronounce him to be free of crime. The emperor one day told me that he had conceived the idea of composing his diplomatic history, or a complete account of his negotiations from Campo Formio to his abduction. If he should have fulfilled his design, what a historical treasure would thus be presented to the world. Speaking of military eloquence, the emperor said, when in the heat of battle passing along the line, I used to exclaim, "Soldiers, unfurl your banners, the moment has come." Our Frenchmen absolutely leapt for joy. I saw them multiply 100-fold. I then thought, nothing impossible. Many of Napoleon's military harangues are well known. The following has been communicated to me by an individual who heard it on the spot when reviewing the 2nd Regiment of Horse-Chasseurs at Lobenstein 2 days before the Battle of Jena. Napoleon, addressing the colonel, said, "How many men are there here?" 500, replied the colonel, "but there are many raw troops among them." "What signifies that?" said the emperor in a tone which denoted surprise at the observation. "Are they not all Frenchmen?" Then turning to the regiment, "My lads," said he, "you must not fear death. When soldiers brave death, they drive him into the enemy's ranks." He here made a motion with his arm expressive of the action to which he alluded. At these words, a sudden movement among the troops, accompanied by a murmur of enthusiasm, seemed to foretell the memorable victory of Rossbach, which took place 48 hours after. At the Battle of Lutzen, the army was chiefly composed of conscripts who had never been in any engagement. It is said that in the heat of the action, Napoleon rode along the rear of the 3rd rank of infantry, supporting and encouraging the young troops. "This is nothing, my lad," said he. "Stand firm. France has her eyes on you. Show that you can die for your country." Napoleon entered a high regard for the Germans. "I levied many millions of imposts on them." "It is true," said he, "but that was necessary. But I should never have insulted them or treated them with contempt. I esteem the Germans. They may hate me. That is natural enough. I was forced for 10 years to fight over the dead bodies of their countrymen. They could not know my real designs or give me credit for my ultimate intentions, which were calculated to render Germany a great nation." The emperor, alluding to one of his decisions, remarked, "I could do nothing in that case. I suffered myself to be moved, and I yielded. There I was wrong. A statesman's heart should be in his head. Napoleon observed that the physical faculties of men were strengthened by their dangers or wants. Thus said he, the Bedouin of the desert has the piercing sight of the lynx, and the savage of the forest has the keen scent of wild animals. One day, mention was made of an individual who thought distinguished for his ideas, and his acts nevertheless betrayed gross faults in his manners and mode of expressing himself. The emperor explained this discordance by saying, you see, the fault is in his first education. His swaddling clothes have been neither fine nor clean. When speaking of the danger he had incurred among the 500 on the 18th Brumaire, he attributed it militarily to local circumstances. He had been obliged to enter the orangery at one of the extremities and to pass along the whole length of it. Misfortune was, said he, that instead of facing my opponents, I was compelled to present my flank to them. When we were alluding to an individual who seemed to think he could overawe us by speaking almost in the tone and language of menace, the emperor said, this is a very absurd idea. Nobody's afraid now. A child would not be afraid. Even little Emmanuel, pointing to my son, would exchange pistol shots with anyone who might require him to do so. These words of the emperor will probably influence my son throughout the rest of his life. Napoleon, on his return from the Russian campaign, was so struck by the courage and pain of mind displayed by Ney that he created him Prince of the Muscova, and he was often heard to say, I have 200 millions in my coffers, and I would give them all for Ney. Remarking on the certainty of the ultimate triumph of modern principles, the emperor said, they cannot but triumph. Mark the train of events in oppression nowadays turns to the disadvantage of the oppressor. On a certain occasion, it was observed to the emperor that he was not fond of settling forward his own merits. That is, replied he, because with me morality and generosity are not in my mouth, but in my nerves. My hand of iron was not at the extremity of my arm. It was immediately connected with my head. I did not receive it from nature. Calculation alone has enabled me to employ it. Speaking of the ill humor and discontent frequently evinced by the inhabitants of Paris, the emperor asked what he was expected to do after all he had accomplished. Sire, said someone present, it was wished that your majesty should stop your horse. Stop my horse, resumed Napoleon. That was easily said. My arm was strong enough, it is true, to stop with a single check all the horses of the continent, but I could not bridle the English fleets, and there lay all the mischief. Had not the people sense enough to see this? One day when the emperor was reproaching an individual for not correcting the vices which he knew he possessed. Sir, said he, when a man knows his moral infirmity, he may cure his mind just as he would cure his arm or his leg. The emperor, speaking of the nobility which he had created, regretted that it had been so ill understood. It was, he said, one of his grandest and happiest ideas. He had induced 3 objects of the highest importance, and all 3 would have been accomplished. First, to reconcile France with Europe, and to restore harmony by seeming to adopt European customs. Second, by the same means, to bring about a complete reconciliation and union between old and new France. And third, to banish feudal nobility, the only kind that is offensive, oppressive, and unnatural. By my plan, said the emperor, I should soon have succeeded in substituting positive and meritorious qualities for antiquated and odious prejudices. My national titles would have exactly restored that equality which feudal nobility prescribed. They were conferred as a reward of merit of every kind. For genealogical parchments, I substituted noble actions, and for private interests, the interests of the country. Family pride would no longer have been founded on obscure and imaginary circumstances, but would have rested on the noblest page of our history. Finally, I would have banished the odious pretensions of blood, an absurd idea, a theory that has no real existence, for we all know very well that there is but one race of men, and that one is not born with boots on his legs and another with a pack saddle on his back. All the nobility in Europe, those who really governed it, were pleased with my plan. They unanimously applauded an institution, the novelty of which enhanced its preeminence. And yet this very novelty would have sapped its foundation and infallibly have destroyed it. Why did that opinion, to which I had secured a triumph, precisely serve the purpose of its enemies? But I have suffered this misfortune oftener than once. the 20th. It must be admitted, my dearest causes, said the emperor to me today, it is most difficult to obtain absolute certainties for the purposes of history. Fortunately, it is in general more a matter of merely curiosity than of real importance. There are so many kinds of truth. The truth with which Fouché or other intriguers of his stamp will tell, for instance, even that which many very honest people may tell will, in some cases, differ essentially from the truth which I may relate. The truth of history, so much in request, to which everybody eagerly appeals, is too often but a word at the time of the events during the heat of conflicting passions. It cannot exist. And if at a later period all parties are agreed respecting it, it is because those persons who were interested in the events, those who might be able to contradict what is asserted, are no more. What then, generally speaking, the truth of history? Of fable agreed upon, as it has been very ingeniously remarked, there are in these matters two essential points, very distinct from each other, the positive facts and the moral intentions. With respect to the positive facts, it would seem that they ought to be incontrovertible, yet you will not find two accounts agreeing together in relating to the same fact. Some have remained contested points to this day, and will ever remain so. With regard to moral intentions, how shall we judge of them? Even admitting the candor of those who relate events, and what will be the case if the narrators be not sincere, or if they should be actuated by interests or passions? I have given an order, but who is able to read my thoughts, my real intentions? Yet everyone will take up that order and measure it according to his own scale, or adapt it to his own plans or system. See the different colorings that will be given to it by the intriguer, whose plans it disturbs or favors. See how he will distort it. The man who assumes importance, to whom the ministers or the sovereign may have hinted something in confidence on the subject, will do the same thing, as will the numerous idlers of the palace, who, having nothing better to do than to listen under windows an event when they have not heard, and each will be so certain of what he tells, and the inferior classes of people who will have received the information from these privileged individuals will be so certain in their turn of its correction. And then memoirs are digested, memoranda are written, witticisms and anecdotes are circulated, and of such materials as history composed. I have seen the plan of my own battle, the intention of my own orders disputed with me, and opinion decide against me. Is not that the creature giving the lie to its creator? Nevertheless, my opponent, who contradicts me, will have his adherents. It is because which has prevented me from writing my own private memoirs, from disclosing my individual feelings, which would naturally have exhibited the shades of my private character. I could not condescend to write confessions after the manner of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, which everybody might have attacked, and therefore I have thought proper to confine the subjects of my dictations here to public acts. I am aware that even these revelations may be contested, for where is the man of the world, whatever be his right, and the strength and power of that right, who may not be attacked and contradicted by an adverse party, but in the eyes of those men who are wise and impartial, of those who reflect and are reasonable, my voice after all will be as good as another's, and I have little dread of the final decision. So much light has been diffused in our days that I rely upon the splendor that will remain after passions have subsided and clouds have passed away. But in the meantime, how many errors will arise? People will often give me credit for a great deal of depth and sagacity on occasions which were perhaps most simple in themselves. I shall be suspected of plans which I never formed. It will be inquired whether I did or did not aspire in reality to universal dominion. The question will be argued at length whether my absolute sway and my arbitrary acts were the result of my character or of my calculations, whether they were determined by my own inclination or by the influence of circumstances, whether I was led into the wars in which I was constantly engaged by my own taste or against my will, whether my insatiable ambition which has been so much deprecated, was kindled by the thirst for dominion and glory, or by my love of order and my concern for the general welfare. For that ambition will serve to be considered under all those different aspects. People will canvass the motives which guided me into the catastrophe of the Duc d'Enghien, and so on with respect to many other events. Sometimes they will distort what was perfectly straight and refine upon what was quite natural. It was not for me to treat upon those subjects here. It would have appeared as if I were pleading my cause, and that I disdained to do. If the rectitude and the sagacity of historians can enable them to form, from what I have dictated, on general matters, a correct opinion and just notions respecting those things which I have not mentioned, so much the better. But along with the faint ray thus afforded, how many false lights will appear to them from the fables and falsehoods of the great intriguers, who all had their views, their plots, their private negotiations, which, being mixed up with the main objects, tend to render the whole an inextricable chaos. To the disclosures, the portfolios, and even the assertions of my ministers, who, with the best intentions, will have to state not so much what really existed as what they believed to have existed, for which of them ever possessed the entire general conception of my mind. Their share of it was most frequently one of the elements of a great whole which they did not know. They will therefore only have seen that side of the prism which concerned them, and even then, how will they have seen it? Did it reach them entire? Was it not already broken? And yet probably every one of them, judging from what he has seen, will give the fantastical result of his own combinations as my true system. And here again we have the admitted fable, which will be called history, nor can it be otherwise. It is true that as there are many, there will be far from agreeing together. However, in their positive assertions, they would have the advantage over me, for I should frequently have found it most difficult to affirm confidently what had been my whole and entire thoughts on any given moment. It is well known that I did not strive to subject circumstances to my ideas, but that I in general suffered myself on the contrary to be led by them. And who can calculate beforehand the chances of accidental circumstances or unexpected events? I have therefore often found it necessary to alter essentially my plan of proceeding, and have acted through life upon general principles rather than according to fixed plans, the mass of the general interest of mankind. What I considered to be the advantage of the greater number, such were the anchors on which I relied, but around which I most frequently floated at the caprice of chance.